You never knew these celebrities are living with HIV. Then and now, 2026. In the 1980s and 1990s, an HIV diagnosis was often treated like a public ending. Careers erased, lives dismissed, names whispered instead of spoken. But what if some of the black celebrities you admired, respected, and watched grow older were living with HIV the entire time? And you never knew. These are not rumors. These are documented lives that quietly defied fear, stigma, and outdated beliefs. Their survival rewrote history while the world looked away. Stay with Legends of Black Excellence, because what you're about to hear may challenge everything you thought you knew. Magic Johnson. When Magic Johnson announced in November 1991 that he was living with HIV, America stopped breathing. At just 32 years old, the Los Angeles Lakers legend stood before cameras and calmly delivered news that at the time, many still equated with a death sentence. This wasn't just a sports story, it was a cultural earthquake. HIV had largely been framed through fear, misinformation, and stigma. Seeing a healthy, charismatic, heterosexual black athlete challenge that narrative forced millions to confront uncomfortable truths. Overnight, Magic became more than a basketball icon. He became the most visible face of HIV in the world. Behind the headlines, however, was a deeply personal reckoning. Johnson retired immediately from the NBA, not because his talent had faded, but because uncertainty and fear surrounded the virus even among medical professionals. Treatments were limited in the early 1990s, and public understanding was dangerously low. Magic faced judgment, speculation, and whispers about his private life. Yet he chose transparency over silence, making a decision that would redefine public education around HIV. He spoke not as a victim, but as a man determined to live and to protect others through awareness. As medical science advanced, so did Magic's second act. Antiretroviral therapy transformed HIV from a fatal illness into a manageable chronic condition for many, and Johnson became living proof of that progress. More than 30 years after his diagnosis, he remains healthy, active, and deeply engaged in business and philanthropy. Through the Magic Johnson Foundation, he invested millions into HIV education testing and treatment access, particularly in underserved black communities disproportionately affected by the virus. His advocacy was quiet at times, but consistent and impactful. What many people still don't realize is how profoundly Magic Johnson reshaped the meaning of an HIV diagnosis. He didn't just survive, he thrived. He built billion-dollar businesses, raised a family, returned to the NBA spotlight, and aged with dignity in public view. For countless Americans especially, those diagnosed in silence, Magic represented hope when hope was rare. His story reminds us that HIV does not erase legacy, humanity, or purpose. Sometimes it reveals them more clearly than ever. Billy Porter. For much of his career, Billy Porter lived two lives. On stage and screen, he was bold, fearless, and unapologetically visible. Off stage, he carried a secret that shaped nearly every decision he made. In 2007, Porter was diagnosed with HIV at a time when stigma, especially toward black men, remained heavy and unforgiving. Rather than go public, he chose silence, believing that disclosure could end his career before it truly began. For more than a decade, he carried that weight alone, even as his talent steadily pushed him towards stardom. The years following his diagnosis were marked by contradiction. Porter continued to perform, audition, and create while privately managing fear, shame, and the daily realities of treatment. He later admitted that secrecy took a serious emotional toll. Living with HIV wasn't what hurt him most, it was living as though he had something to be ashamed of. In interviews, Porter has spoken candidly about how internalized stigma, reinforced by cultural and religious pressures, nearly broke his spirit. His silence wasn't about denial. It was about survival in an industry he feared was not ready to accept the full truth of who he was. Everything changed in 2018 when Porter won a Tony Award for Kinky Boots, followed by an Emmy for his groundbreaking role in Pose. With success came stability, and with stability came courage. In 2021, Porter publicly revealed his HIV status not as a confession, but as a declaration of freedom. He described the moment as finally telling himself the truth out loud. By then, he had been living a healthy life with HIV for over 14 years, clear evidence of how far medical treatment had advanced, and how outdated many public fears still were. Billy Porter's story matters because it speaks to the hidden lives behind public success. Many people still don't realize that someone they admire, applaud, and celebrate may also be living with HIV quietly, responsibly, and fully. Porter didn't just break barriers in fashion, theater, and television. He shattered the myth that HIV defines a person's worth or future. His journey reframes HIV not as an ending, but as a reality that can coexist with excellence, longevity, and joy. In choosing truth over silence, Billy Porter gave countless others permission to do the same. Hydeia Broadbent. Hydeia Broadbent never had the option of privacy. Born in 1984 and diagnosed with HIV before her first birthday after contracting the virus perinatally, her life unfolded in public view long before she could understand what that meant. At a time when HIV was surrounded by fear and misinformation, doctors initially believed she would not live past early childhood. Yet Hydeia survived, and in doing so became one of the most recognizable faces of HIV awareness in America, even as a young child. By the age of 6, Hydeia was speaking on national television, including appearances on The Oprah Winfrey Show, calmly explaining what many adults still misunderstood. Her presence challenged deeply rooted stereotypes. She didn't look sick. She wasn't dying. She was articulate, joyful, and undeniably human. For millions of Americans in the late 1980s and 1990s, Hydeia forced a re-examination of what living with HIV truly looked like. While the world debated morality and blame, she simply told the truth of her life. One medication, one doctor visit, one day at a time. Growing up in the spotlight came at a cost. Hydeia faced bullying, isolation, and the emotional weight of representing an entire community before she had fully found her own voice. Yet she continued advocating, understanding that visibility could save lives. She spoke openly about treatment adherence, about the realities of fatigue and hospitalizations, and about the importance of compassion. As medical care improved, Hydeia's survival itself became a testament to scientific progress, particularly the advances in antiretroviral therapy that allowed children born with HIV to reach adulthood. Today, many people assume the HIV crisis belongs to the past. Hydeia Broadbent's story quietly reminds us otherwise. She represents a generation that lived through the worst years and endured long enough to see hope emerge. Though she may not dominate headlines now, her impact remains profound. Hydeia didn't choose to be a symbol, but by living openly, honestly, and resiliently, she helped transform fear into understanding. Her life stands as proof that HIV does not define destiny, and that survival, especially when shared, can become a powerful form of advocacy. Ray Lewis Thornton. When Ray Lewis Thornton learned she was HIV positive in the late 1980s, she did not fit the image America had been taught to fear. She was a young, professional black woman, educated, ambitious, and newly married. At the time, HIV was largely framed as someone else's problem associated with drug use, or marginalized communities, rarely with women like her. That illusion shattered when she received her diagnosis, forcing her to confront not only a life-changing illness, but a society unprepared to see women, especially black women, as part of the HIV narrative. Rather than retreat into silence, Ray made a radical choice. In 1992, she publicly disclosed her HIV status, becoming one of the first heterosexual black women in the United States to do so. Her decision came at great personal cost. She lost relationships, faced professional discrimination, and endured judgment that often felt more painful than the illness itself. Yet Ray understood something critical: invisibility was killing people. If women continued to believe HIV could not happen to them, prevention efforts would fail. Her voice, steady and unapologetic, began filling that dangerous gap. Ray's advocacy quickly gained national attention. She appeared on major media platforms, including The Oprah Winfrey Show, and later became the first openly HIV-positive person to be featured on the cover of Essence magazine. That moment was historic not because of celebrity, but because it placed a Black woman living with HIV at the center of her own story, not as a warning, but as a survivor. Ray spoke candidly about treatment, sexual health, and the realities of stigma, helping normalize conversations many were afraid to have. More than 3 decades later, Ray Lewis Thornton remains a powerful example of longevity and purpose. Advances in HIV treatment transformed her diagnosis from a death sentence into a manageable condition, allowing her to build a full life while continuing her work in public health education. Many people still don't realize how influential her courage was during the height of the epidemic. Ray's story reminds us that awareness doesn't always come from fame, it comes from truth. By choosing visibility over fear, she helped save lives one conversation at a time. Mickey Blanco. Mickey Blanco's story unfolds at the intersection of art, identity, and survival. Known for pushing boundaries in hip-hop and performance art, Blanco built a career defined by fearlessness on stage. Yet in 2011, behind the experimental sound and unapologetic expression, Mickey received an HIV diagnosis that would quietly reshape their life. At the time, HIV stigma remained deeply rooted within the music industry, particularly in spaces that demanded strength, hypermasculinity, and silence. For years, Blanco chose privacy not out of denial, but out of caution in a world that often punished vulnerability. In 2015, Mickey Blanco made a deliberate decision to speak publicly, revealing their HIV-positive status through a social media post that quickly spread across the cultural landscape. The announcement was not framed as tragedy, but as truth. Blanco emphasized living healthily, adhering to treatment, and refusing to be defined by fear. For many fans, especially younger audiences navigating identity and health in silence, it was the first time they had seen an artist address HIV with honesty rather than shame. The moment disrupted outdated assumptions about who lives with HIV and what that life can look like. What followed was a complex mix of support, misunderstanding, and resistance. Blanco has spoken openly about the emotional labor of disclosure, particularly as a Black, gender-nonconforming artist. Rather than retreat, they integrated the experience into their work, using music and performance to explore resilience, mortality, and self-ownership. HIV became part of the story, but never the whole story. As treatments continued to improve, Blanco's public health message remained consistent. HIV is manageable, and silence is often more damaging than the virus itself. Many people still don't realize how quietly transformative Mickey Blanco's visibility has been. In an industry that often avoids uncomfortable realities, Blanco chose transparency. Their journey challenges lingering stigma, especially among younger generations who assume HIV belongs to the past. By living openly and creatively, Mickey Blanco reminds us that survival can be radical, and that telling the truth in one's own voice can become a powerful act of liberation. Kia LaBeija. Kia LaBeija's life has been shaped by HIV from the very beginning, yet her story is far more expansive than a diagnosis. Born in New York City, Kia contracted HIV at birth during a period when treatment options for infants were limited and survival was uncertain. She was named after the House of LaBeija, a legendary ballroom house, signaling a future rooted in culture, resilience, and chosen family. From an early age, Kia understood that her body carried a history few around her fully comprehended. Unlike many public figures, Kia did not first speak through interviews or speeches, she spoke through art. As she grew into adulthood, photography and performance became her language of survival. Her work, particularly the series 24, documented her medical routines, pill regimens, and moments of exhaustion with unflinching honesty. These images challenged the sanitized narratives, often attached to HIV, revealing the emotional and physical realities of long-term treatment. Through her lens, HIV was neither sensationalized nor hidden, it was humanized. Kaya's presence extended beyond galleries. As a dancer and performer in the ballroom community, and later as a collaborator with fashion and music icons, she brought visibility to a generation born with HIV that many people forget exists. Advances in antiretroviral therapy allowed her to reach adulthood, something once considered unlikely for children born HIV positive in the 1980s and 1990s. Yet she never portrayed herself as a medical success story alone. Kia openly addressed fatigue loss and the psychological toll of surviving when others did not. Many people still don't realize that Kia LaBeija represents a quiet revolution in how HIV is seen today. She doesn't lecture or preach. She invites viewers into her lived experience and allows discomfort to do the teaching. Her story reminds us that HIV is not just about infection rates or awareness campaigns. It is about lives carried forward with courage. Through art, vulnerability, and presence, Kia LaBeija shows that survival itself can be a form of expression, and that visibility, when chosen on one's own terms, can be profoundly healing. Andre de Shields. For more than 5 decades, Andre de Shields has commanded the stage with elegance, discipline, and quiet power. To theater audiences, he is a Broadway legend, a performer whose voice, posture, and presence feel timeless. What many people didn't know for years is that behind this extraordinary longevity is a private battle with HIV, one he has lived with since the late 1980s. At a time when an HIV diagnosis often came with fear, isolation, and an expectation of early death, de Shields chose a different path: commitment to survival, self-care, and purpose. Diagnosed in 1989, Andre de Shields entered what he later described as a period of deep reflection. Rather than allowing the diagnosis to define him, he treated it as a call to live with intention. He embraced medical treatment as it evolved, prioritized physical and mental health, and adopted a disciplined lifestyle rooted in mindfulness and balance. While many of his contemporaries were lost during the height of the AIDS crisis, de Shields continued working steadily, often without publicly discussing his status, letting his craft speak louder than his circumstances. His quiet endurance became extraordinary with time. Decades later, de Shields reached a career milestone few achieve. In 2019, at the age of 73, he won a Tony Award for Hadestown. Standing on stage, he briefly acknowledged his HIV status, offering gratitude for having lived long enough to experience that moment. For many watching, it was a revelation. Here was a man who had lived with HIV for over 30 years, not hidden, not diminished, but thriving at the highest level of his profession. Andre de Shields' story reframes what living with HIV can look like over a lifetime. It is not always loud activism or public declarations. Sometimes it is persistence. His life stands as proof that HIV does not end ambition, artistry, or relevance. For those who lived through the darkest years of the epidemic, his journey offers something rare: reassurance. Survival, when paired with discipline and dignity, can become a legacy of its own. Trinity K. Bonet. When Trinity K. Bonet first appeared on RuPaul's Drag Race, audiences saw confident, sharp performance skills and undeniable star power. What many did not see was the weight she carried behind the scenes. Diagnosed with HIV in her early 20s, Trinity entered adulthood at a moment when stigma still shaped how people with HIV were treated, especially within entertainment spaces that prized perfection. For years, she lived quietly with her diagnosis, navigating health, identity, and ambition in parallel. Trinity has spoken openly about how the diagnosis initially shook her sense of self. Like many young people, she feared rejection, isolation, and being reduced to a label rather than seen as a full person. Treatment required discipline, emotional resilience, and acceptance long before public understanding had fully caught up with medical progress. Yet Trinity continued to perform, refine her craft, and build her presence in the drag world, choosing to let excellence lead while truth waited for the right moment. That moment came as visibility grew. In later years, Trinity K. Bonet publicly shared her HIV status, reframing it not as a confession, but as representation. Her openness mattered particularly for younger LGBTQ+ viewers who rarely saw themselves reflected honestly on mainstream television. By speaking out, Trinity helped normalize conversations around HIV, emphasizing that, with modern treatment, people can live healthy, fulfilling lives. She became part of a new generation showing that HIV is manageable, and that stigma, not the virus, remains the greater threat. Many viewers still don't realize how meaningful Trinity's visibility has been. In a culture driven by image, she chose authenticity. Her story challenges outdated fears and reminds audiences that HIV does not erase talent, beauty, or worth. Trinity K. Trinity. Bonet's journey is one of persistence and pride, a testament to how living openly can turn personal struggle into collective strength and how representation, even when quiet, can change lives. Marvelyn Brown. Marvelyn Brown was just 19 years old when her life changed forever. In the early 2000s, newly arrived in New York City, and eager to build a future, she received an HIV diagnosis that felt unreal and devastating. Unlike many public figures whose stories begin with fame, Marvelyn's began with vulnerability. She has spoken openly about the shock, denial, and fear that followed, especially as a young Black woman who never believed HIV could happen to her. At the time, public messaging around HIV often failed to reach women like Marvelyn, leaving dangerous gaps in awareness and prevention. In the months after her diagnosis, Marvelyn struggled deeply. She admits that she initially neglected her health, avoiding treatment and pretending the virus did not exist. This period of silence nearly cost her life. Eventually, a severe illness forced her to confront reality and begin antiretroviral therapy. That turning point became the foundation of her transformation. Rather than allowing shame to define her story, Marvelyn chose responsibility to herself and to others who might be listening but felt unseen. What followed was an unexpected rise as a powerful public voice. Marvelyn Brown became an author, releasing her memoir, The Naked Truth, Young, Beautiful, and HIV Positive, a raw and honest account of living with HIV as a young Black woman. She went on to speak at universities, conferences, and national forums, addressing issues many avoided: sexual health misinformation and the emotional toll of stigma. Her message was never about fear. It was about clarity. HIV, she emphasized, is preventable, treatable, and survivable when met with truth and care. Many people still don't realize how influential Marvelyn Brown has been in reshaping the conversation around HIV for women. She was not a singer, athlete, or movie star, but her impact rivaled any celebrity's reach. By sharing her mistakes as openly as her victories, she connected with audiences across generations, especially those who believed HIV only affected other people. Marvelyn's life stands as a reminder that visibility saves lives and that honesty can be a form of leadership. In telling her story, she gave countless others permission to protect theirs. Dazon Dixon Diallo. Dazon Dixon. Diallo's story is not one of red carpets or standing ovations. Yet her influence has quietly shaped national conversations around HIV for decades. Diagnosed with HIV in the early 1990s, Dazon was a young Black woman confronting a health crisis in a society that rarely centered women, especially Black women, in discussions about the virus. At that time, HIV education focused largely on men, leaving women dangerously misinformed and underserved. Dazon's diagnosis became a turning point that transformed her from a private individual into a powerful advocate for systemic change. Rather than viewing HIV as a personal misfortune, Dazon recognized it as a public health failure. She began asking difficult questions about why Black women were being left out of prevention efforts, why gender dynamics and economic inequality were ignored, and why silence was allowed to persist. These questions led her to co-found Sister Love, Inc., one of the first women-centered HIV/AIDS organizations in the United States. Through Sister Love, Dazon worked directly with communities most affected, focusing on education testing, reproductive justice, and empowerment, rather than fear-based messaging. Dazon's leadership extended far beyond grassroots activism. She became a respected voice in national and international policy discussions, advising public health institutions and speaking at global conferences. Her advocacy emphasized facts: HIV is preventable, treatment works, and women must be included in every solution. Living openly with HIV, she challenged the stigma that suggested diagnosis equaled irresponsibility or moral failure. Her life itself became evidence that knowledge, access to care, and dignity save lives. Many people still don't realize how deeply Dazon Dixon Diallo has influenced HIV prevention strategies in the United States. She may not be a household name, but her work reshaped how public health approaches Black women and families. Dazon's story reminds us that celebrity is not always about visibility, it is about impact. By refusing silence and demanding inclusion, she helped turn lived experience into lasting change. Her journey stands as a testament to the power of truth when it is paired with courage and community. Danja R. Love. Danja R. Love is not the kind of celebrity who dominates tabloids, yet his voice carries a quiet power that has reshaped contemporary American theater. Diagnosed with HIV as a young adult, Love entered a world where the virus was rarely discussed openly, especially in artistic spaces that still struggled with honesty around illness, sexuality, and vulnerability. As a Black Afro-queer man, he understood early that his story existed at the margins of mainstream narratives. Rather than hide it, he eventually chose to write directly from lived experience. Before becoming widely recognized, Love faced the same fears shared by many newly diagnosed people: uncertainty about health, longevity, and whether his future would be cut short. HIV forced him to confront mortality sooner than most, and that awareness deeply influenced his creative voice. Instead of treating HIV as a single defining tragedy, Love explored it as part of a broader human experience, intertwined with love, intimacy, grief, and hope. This perspective would later become central to his work as a playwright. His breakout play, Soft, drew critical acclaim for its emotional honesty and restraint. While not autobiographical in a literal sense, the play reflects the psychological terrain of living with HIV in the modern era, where treatment exists, but stigma still lingers quietly. Love has spoken about the importance of portraying HIV without sensationalism, showing characters who live, desire, and struggle beyond their diagnosis. In doing so, he challenged audiences, many of whom had not thought about HIV in years, to reconsider their assumptions. What many people don't realize is how significant Danja R. Love's visibility is for a new generation. In a time when HIV is often described as manageable, his work reminds us that emotional realities still matter. Medication may control the virus, but silence can still isolate people. Love's willingness to exist publicly as an artist living with HIV offers representation that is subtle, dignified, and deeply human. Danja R. Love's story is not about shock or confession. It is about presence. By telling stories rooted in truth, he expands who gets to be seen and heard in conversations about HIV. His journey proves that living with HIV does not limit artistic depth, it can sharpen it, adding layers of empathy that resonate far beyond the stage. For decades, HIV has existed at the crossroads of fear, silence, and misunderstanding, yet many Black public figures lived full, influential lives while managing it responsibly. From athletes and actors to artists and advocates, their stories challenge the outdated belief that an HIV diagnosis defines destiny. Medical advances have changed outcomes, but stigma still shapes perception, especially among older generations who remember the crisis years. These lives force us to ask uncomfortable questions about what we think we know versus what we were taught to fear. So here's the real debate. Is HIV still stigmatized because of the virus itself, or because society refuses to update its thinking?